Today I'm super excited because I am chatting with one of the authors from Our Next Reality, how the AI-powered metaverse will reshape the world.
And I want to talk about if artificial intelligence has a role in government. Will artificial intelligence really ever understand compassion like a human's? Can it hold multiple perspectives in its head in the same way we can? Or maybe in a way that we actually can, and that turns out to be superior. And of course, you know a lot about the China-US AI relations, and I really want to dive into that too.
Alvin Graylin, thank you so much for taking time to
thanks,
chat with
Dylan,
me.
for reaching out and arranging this. We've been trying to go back and forth for a month trying to find the time. So I'm really glad that we got together, and I look forward to a deep and insightful conversation. This is my personal views, so it does not represent any of the views or perspectives of any company or organization I belong to.
A child that's born today, do you think by the time they hit their 25th birthday, the world looks pretty much unrecognizable?
They will not recognize the world that we live in right now when they come out of college, right? Or even if there may not even be a college then. But I guess both myself and Lewis believe that in the next 10 years, the world will change more than the last 100 has. Right? So if you think about what did the world look like in the beginning of the 20th century? The car just started to come into place. There was no commercial flights, there was no rockets, there was no computers, there was no telephone. That was the kind of the world that you think about what we have now will represent. Very soon you're going to have every family will probably have one or more of these human robots at their home doing all the daily tasks that they are doing, right? They will likely have an option of going to school or not, and probably are going to work or not. And so their day will be completely free of their choice, but they will not be worried about money as we are. So much of our life right now is about money. Why do we work? Why do we go to school? So we can get a good job. Why do we want to get a good job? So we can have enough money so that we can have kids and we can buy a house and do that other thing. Then so we can afford to put them through school. All these things is all of 80% of people work but don't enjoy their work. Only 20% of people actually find satisfaction from their work. Right. So the rest of us, or I'm actually probably one of the few people who actually enjoy my work, but I think there's a lot of people who would say, if today you told me I don't need to work and I can still live and have a good, comfortable life, I would rather go do something else. I would rather go be a musician or be a sports player or go travel or go learn things. Right. What we think, with this type of world, people say, oh, but then they're not going to have any purpose. I actually think it is the opposite, is that they will actually find their real purpose. Because the purpose that they have today is an artificial purpose that they have created so that they are working so that they can live. What we will be able to allot to everybody is that they will be able to have a choice to find the way that they want to spend their time that brings them the most fulfillment. And so the term occupation is what we use to denote jobs today, right? And occupation, if you go back to the root word of occupation, it's occupatio, the Latin word for to occupy. And what is it occupying? It's occupying your time. So you're trading your time for money. This is what occupation means. And the real word we should be more focused on is actually vocation. Right? But today, vocation is a bad word. It's saying, oh, blue-collar workers, that's vocational jobs, right? Or vocational studies. But back in the day when vocation was first created, when you had these apprentices and masters and people spend 8-10 years learning a craft and then going and doing it, vocation actually means to be called, your calling, right? That's the Latin root for vocation. So if you can actually spend your time doing what your calling is, and that may or may not be actually doing a craft. It could be playing music. It could be, going and being a pastor or whatever, right? Whatever your calling is. That should be a more proper use of our time and something that will bring us lasting satisfaction, right? Because it is something that we personally enjoy. Right? And you can also change that. If we get to a world where we have full abundance, where robots are doing all the work and AI is doing all of the thinking and production, and we essentially solve the energy issue because we've now created fusion or created clean fission, or we've now put the whole Sahara Desert with solar cells, and so now we have plenty of energy, right? And that energy now allows us to make essentially infinite amount of fresh water, so we can have water, we can grow food anywhere, right? We have no issues with food, and then we also now have these fully intelligent AI teachers that are teaching everybody now to be, PhD level and everything. And because from their childhood, they are learning and they have continued to preserve their curiosity, because that AI tutor is helping them learn every aspect of life that they need to. Right? That is so different than the world that we live in today. And in a world where everybody's educated, you're going to have a lot less violence. You're going to have a lot less conflict. You're going to have essentially no need for wars, because why would I send my children around the world to go kill somebody or be killed to get somebody's oil? Why do I care? And this is what's happening today.
Yeah, and all that money from military budgets.
If you look at the US spends $1 trillion a year on military, right? How many new roads and airports and hospitals can that build? This is why China has something like 50,000 miles of fast, high-speed rails. The U.S. has 0, right? Why, right? It doesn't make sense. And the China now has 50% of their cars being sold are now EVs. 50%.
Yeah, like we could have done that.
It's mid to, I think, mid-single digits, something like that. Maybe 6-7%, right? So why? Well, for a country that makes 3 or 4 times per capita more money than China, but they are not able to provide these services. America has the highest cost for medical care in the world, and one of the worst lifespans for a developed country. Does that make sense?
No, we need AI to be our governments in some ways too, I think, to help us smooth out some of this bureaucracy.
Exactly. So this is, I think, chapter 12 of the book is should AI be part of managing our government? So my perspective is actually think that if we go back to historical concepts of the philosopher king, right? This is what Plato talked about as the best form of government. And they actually had essentially people who were born and they were designated to be the leaders of the country, and they would teach them philosophy and math and science and history, and they were not allowed to have children, and they were not allowed to have this big social group so that they don't have corruption, they don't have nepotism, and their job is to make the best decisions for their countries, right? So they call them the guardian class. And I think essentially what we're doing with these AIs is that same thing, is that it will know all of history, all of philosophy, all of psychology, all of economics, and all of science, and be able to give us the best decisions of how to do this. And it will be rational and it will be incorruptible, right? So the problem with humans is at some point they will become corruptible. Even if they don't have kids, they will have some personal wants or whatever, right? Whereas, in fact, Voltaire said the best form of government is a benevolent tyrant with intermittent periods of assassination, right? So
yikes. Okay. Yeah.
But what he's admitting to is that having a really intelligent, benevolent person driving the system is the best way to run it, because now you're not having these debates of people just doing partisan politics. You're actually making the best decision. But people are corruptible. And if people are corruptible, you can't have the same person there forever. But I think with AI, if it's not corruptible, and we are seeing the signs that the smarter somebody is, the more information they have, the more they are rational, the more compassionate they are, the more they are able to make better, wiser decisions, right? I mean, how many of your mentors or people who have seen it, done it, been there, gone around the world, they're not preaching violence. They're not preaching, get the most, make the most money, that's the future. They're saying, be at peace with yourself, learn more, be good to people, right? I think that is what we will find, is that AI will have that type of tendency. And there's actually multiple research papers that are showing that the more intelligent these AIs get, the more they are actually able to make rational, longer-term thinking decisions. So, yeah.
Yeah, and to know about politics in every language and every country in a deep way that no human could give you such an interesting perspective on a decision.
That is a thing. That is a thing that is so sorely missing. Because the last month and a half, I spent a week and a half in China, a week a week in DC, and a week in Brussels. And I talked to the people, the leaders, the policymakers in all these countries. And what you find is that they don't understand the perspectives of the other people. They know their perspective, and they say, "Oh, I'm doing this, but I'm doing the right thing for my people." But they don't understand how other people are thinking about it because they don't spend enough time going there. And the ones that actually do understand are the ones that have spent real time living in these other countries, interacting with these people, and understand their perspectives. And when they do that, they now take a much broader angle of how they make decisions and how they're making their analysis. Otherwise, it's all about me. It's all about us. It's all about how do we win, right? When I was in DC, the question I kept getting asked was, how do we keep China from getting good AI? How do we keep them from making better semiconductors? And is that really the core of what you want to do, is to hold somebody else back? Shouldn't the better question be, how do we get an AI that can help us solve the world's problems? How do we solve the health problem? How do we solve the energy problem? How do we get people to educate our children better? That should be a better question than how do we hold them back? Because when you hold somebody else back, what do you think they're going to respond then? They're going to say, "Hey, these guys are trying to hold me back. Well, then, I'm gonna build my own resources. I'm going to be independent of them, and then I'm going to fight back when I get strong enough." Right? This is what people.
It's just dividing.
Right? And the answer becomes an escalation of violence. And this is what I'm seeing on both sides. I go to Beijing and it's the same thing. They're saying, "Hey, look at them. Look at all those laws that they're saying. Look at the speeches from these officials in the U.S. All they want to do is to keep us down. We have a 2,000, 5,000 year history, and we've been the greatest country of innovation for so many years, and now they want to keep us from having our due right to be a major power in the world. That is not right." Right? And I think they're right about that. Right? So if you look at it from that perspective, we really should not be judging the way that we do, because until you spend some time in their shoes and understand their perspective, the people here will say, "Oh, it's about democracy and we need to protect our democracy." But you go to people in China, nobody in China is saying, "I want to take over the U.S. I want to spread communism in the world." Nobody in China is doing this. If you look at the behavior of China right now, what are they doing? They're building roads, bridges, power plants, ports, communication systems in Africa, in Southeast Asia, in places where the U.S. is not doing these things. So they're going and helping create infrastructure to then create goodwill, and then to create trade between these countries. Right? They don't care what religion you are. They don't care what form of government you are. They're not trying to do regime changes. The U.S. have been involved in 50 plus regime changes in the last 30 years around the world. Right? The U.S. has been involved have been in a war condition with somebody in the world since the end of World War II. China has not been a single war for the last 50 years. Right? So who is the more aggressive player? Right? That's the thing, is when you look at the data, it's very, very clear. The U.S. has 250 military bases on the coastal border around China. I don't know if you know this. China has a single base in Djibouti to make sure that their oil can make it over when they ship it out. Right? So when the U.S. talks about China being a military threat to the U.S. and U.S. sovereignty, it is a lot of hogwash. I'll just say that, right? And it sounds good because it's something that unites your people. You're like, "Oh, there's the enemy." Everybody has to have an enemy for you to unite your people. And right now, China is the best example. And I'm not saying that. I'm actually a U.S. citizen, right? So I spent half my life in China, half my life in the U.S., and I have my heritage in both sides, right? So I'm part Chinese, part American. So I am not saying this in terms of saying, "Hey, I think China's all right." I think China's got issues too. There are definitely issues over there. But the issues that are being brought out as, here's the reasons why we need to keep China down, it is all BS, right? In fact, if you look at a lot of recent discussion to say, "Hey, we need to have sanctions on China on semiconductors because it is for national security. They're being used in weapons." Do you know what? Do you know what size nodes are being used for semiconductors in weapons today? Can you guess?
Like 6 nanometer or something? Is that what you're talking about, the distance?
So the leading nodes right now are something like 2, 3, 4, 5 nanometers. Okay, that's what's being built. That's what's being built in the latest factories in Taiwan. The ones that are on the F-35 and F-22 and all these cruise missiles, it's anywhere between 50 nanometers to 200 nanometers.
Oh, old school.
Very old technology, right? And do you know why they have very old technology? Because it's stable, because it's durable, because it's resilient to temperature, right? When you have a weapon that is in very unclear conditions, you cannot use the latest thing, right? So you want something that is proven. So the fact that you say, oh, they can't have these, 3 nanometer chips because they're using it for weapons. Do you know what's happening right now in Russia and Ukraine? Is that people are taking microwaves and toasters and taking the chips out of those to put into their missiles, because that's the grade of semiconductors that are being used. Right? That's the crazy thing. So to the excuses that are being used to say, why should we sanction China from not being able to get AI? That is really the wrong way to think about this. What I keep saying whenever I go to these different places and I talk to these policymakers is I tell them, we need to move to a collaborative model. The things that are the biggest constraints that we have today in terms of getting to AI, and when we just talked about all the benefits, if we get to AGI, all these benefits come, right? Free energy, free food, free education, free healthcare. Don't you just want everybody to have that, right? Now, instead of saying, I'm going to be the first to get it, and I want to create a Manhattan project to create AI first. This is what everybody's trying to do. Whether when they talk about sovereign AI, this is what they talk about, right? They want the Middle East, Saudi Arabia version, or they want the French version, or the US version, or the China version. And when you do that, you limit it to your data, you limit it to the compute that you have, and you limit it to the researchers that you have, right? And the biggest limiters that we have right now are the breadth of data, right? We have a lot of data, but it's not necessarily representative. We have a limitation of high quality, high bandwidth compute that can be used for training, right? And so whenever you talk to AI researchers today, the first thing they say is, I wish I had more servers. I have more cluster. I want to do more experiments. I want to do larger models, right? And when we try to create 200 versions, when you do a sovereign AI for 200 countries, you're creating 200 versions of the same thing. You're just running these models through the same data with with the same limited resources that you have, because now you're dividing your resources by 200. Why are you running out of data? If you just put all of your data together, you put all of your servers together, and you put all of the brains that you have. Right now, I think 45% of all researchers in the world today, AI researchers, came from China. Okay. And there are more Chinese-born researchers, AI researchers working in China and in the US than there is US-born AI researchers, right? So there's already that collaboration from a cultural perspective. Let's do an Apollo project that is going to take us to the moon in terms of AI, moonshot, right? That's really the future we should be thinking about.
And then both countries get all the benefits faster.
We get there faster. We make sure that it's stable. We put the best minds on it. It takes everybody's perspectives into account instead of just your country. Because if I'm only taking the U.S. country's perspective, what does that mean? It means I'm the good guy, everybody else is the bad guy. I'm going to optimize U.S. results. That is not a good result for the world, right? So, anyways, I don't know. I got to get off my soapbox. But this is something I hear so often people don't understand. And they want to do this splitting of resources, right? This is why we're going around trying to build $100 billion data clusters or server clusters to do something when we have all of these servers already. The US has something like 4,000 data centers around the country. Why don't we share some of those and put them together instead of just doing, one center that you're just going to make and then create a nuclear plant next to it so that you can power it, right? These things just doesn't make sense when you have resources around the world that you can share to do that, to create a better answer, right? And you know about the scaling laws, right? So the more data we put in, the more compute we put in, the bigger the parameters, it becomes smarter, right? And that has been true for the last 15 years. Actually, it's probably been true for the last 50 years, right? So why do we why do we not just follow that end? Because whatever comes out of it should be a public good. It should be something that we do for society, for humanity, not for a single company or for a single country.
Yeah. And I know I would feel safer if it was the whole world building a system like that.
Well, I mean, it's especially when you have people like, Sam Altman, who pretty much everybody around him has disappeared from him because for one reason or another. And, there's different people who suspect issues. But a person who wants to be in control of the most important technology in the world probably should not be the person who should be getting the chance to do that. So I think Plato was the guy that said, he who wants to be a leader should not be the leader. So, and it's very clear that actually Sam wants to be the leader, right? I don't know if you saw his, he did a podcast with Lex Friedman, and he said, AGI, when it comes, it's going to create $100 trillion of value, and it's going to be my responsibility to decide how to divide this $100 trillion. I was like, well, who elected you king of the world to make that decision? So that's a little scary for me, honestly. And right now he's probably the person who is most closest to getting to that result because he has all the resources of Microsoft.
So I can definitely imagine in the future how learning is going to be super enhanced. Part of me worries that I'm going to be learning things I don't want to learn, like advertisements and other people's agendas. But maybe we could talk about just how much better learning can kind of set in compared to kind of the rote memory that a lot of us went through school.
I did my studies on back in the early 90s was how does XR and AI together. In fact, here's a funny thing is I wrote this paper 30 something years ago. I went, and this year I went back to my advisor, Tom Furness, who runs the HIT Lab. He found my paper from 30 something years ago, and it's essentially it talks about how AI, XR, and a global connected network of worlds is going to make education a better place. So this is essentially kind of predicting what we are going to have soon and the whole metaverse concept 30 plus years ago when none of this existed. And even actually this was written before Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash was.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Because of my background in this area, I've actually done multiple studies, and we have, there's a whole section in the book that talks about how AI and XR is amazing for education, for teaching, because it is full brain learning. We have evolved over the last several 100,000 years to live in this 3D world. But over the last 30, 40 years, we've been forcing ourselves to look at screens. And over the last couple hundred years, we've been forcing ourselves to look at blackboards and books as a way of consuming content. But that is actually not the natural way. The natural way is to use your body, use your ears, use your, to experience it. And we always hear about, some people are visual learners, some people are audio learners, and some people are kind of experiential learners. And when you're in XR, whatever method of learning is right for you, it can happen, right? And the other amazing thing that is soon going to happen is that with the maturity of AI, we will now give everybody an all-knowing tutor that can then teach them at their pace of learning. Because if you go into most classrooms today, essentially it's one curriculum. You just gotta kind of go. If you're too smart, you're gonna be bored. If you're a little slow, then you're gonna be frustrated.
Right, the perfect teacher.
The teacher essentially says, stop asking questions. Just follow me. I'm gonna tell you when it gets time. We'll do a test, and it's all about tests and scores and memorization. And what we can do now is to have an AI that actually follows you. If you have glasses that have cameras on them, and right now I'm actually, these are my daily wear glasses, the Ray-Bans, and it has camera on it. It has multiple microphones, and it's able to sense my environment, right? And I think even in the announcement that Meta just did, they said now it can do things like remember where your car was, right? So it is using things that it's getting from these sensors to be able to give you a added memory. Now, very soon, the AI agent will be able to see teaching opportunities and use that to then tell you about physics or history or whatever travel site you went to and give you background on it. And that technology is actually available today without any new innovation, right? So I think we are really at the precipice of completely disrupting the whole education model. The education system initially, the current one that we use, was was originally created to make factory workers, to make people who thought the same, who can do simple tasks, move cogs from A to B, and then, come in on time and leave on time and don't make any trouble, right? That's essentially what our education system teaches, where the original academy from that Socrates and Plato, that and Aristotle, when they were making it, it was a group of people just coming around and chatting and talking about things and asking questions. It wasn't somebody who was just telling you the answer. It was somebody who challenged you to think and to think about a variety of topics, not just one subject and just do this test and you're done. And so I think we now have an opportunity to have AI come in and do that for us, and give every single child on earth a personalized tutor that is all-knowing. And I think that is going to completely change the level of knowledge and wisdom we have around the world.
Well, maybe we could talk about how the systems would be built, like sort of the objective functions or sort of the system behind what a system like that was built for and what its agenda would be. Because when I learn from a teacher right now in a school, I generally know that what they need to do to get paid is to teach to the book. They have their incentives kind of aligned in a certain way, which for better or worse is what it is. But in the future, what if the thing that I'm learning from is getting money from advertisers, or a company like Meta has a certain agenda? Like, how will society sort of change and the blur the line of trust?
It is critical that we do not have an advertising model when we get to this future 3D internet. Right. And so actually, let me quickly define, when I say the metaverse, what I mean is a 3D internet. Right? We have essentially right now internet with hundreds of millions of sites and millions of apps, and they're interconnected. We will, in the next 5 years or so, get to a metaverse where we will have potentially millions or hundreds of millions of worlds that are now replacing these websites and apps, that we can go in and do things and learn things and buy things, right? And in that kind of a world, it is imperative that advertising is not the business model. Because if it is the business model, then we are in trouble. Because this technology can manipulate you to think and believe anything, right? Because it senses all of your biometric information. It knows what you're interested in. It knows your beliefs. It has all, if it's an AI system that knows you and has seen all your background, all your conversations, it knows what you think and how you think, and is able to, if there's an advertiser that's paying to adjust a message to you to buy something or believe something, we're in trouble. It has to be where the user is the director of this AI, the director of what they're seeing. And if we don't have that, then the world is in trouble.
Maybe, obviously, as the optimist in the book, you're saying like we should pay for it, but it does seem realistic that a product is cheaper if it's sponsored by advertising, and there's a lot of people who are going to opt for a cheaper option. So do you think government needs to step in and say, like, you're not allowed to sell advertising to like lower the cost of a device or an experience?
If you look back on history and you see how technology has improved our productivity over the last 2,000 years, our productivity has gone up about 10,000x, okay, per person, in terms of how much we can create per hour. Now, if you look at the current per capita income, and you look at the hourly rate, and there's actually a chart on that in the book. So what it shows is that there is essentially, in today's world, if you live in Bangladesh, your average hours per year is 2,400. If you live in Germany, it's something like 1,400, right? And essentially, by increasing per capita income, by increasing productivity, you're able to reduce the hourly work of a person. Now, it's not in the book, but I actually have another chart I can send you. But I did a regression analysis of this chart, and what I found is that if we increase the global output productivity by 3x, just 3x, right? We will be able to get people to go from essentially 5-day work week to a 2-day work week. If we increase it by 10 to 12x, we can bring them down to about a 1-day work week. So the cost is directly, it's not a straight line, but it's it's a logarithmic curve. It's a straight line on a logarithmic curve. But what it does show us is that increased productivity will allow us to have the freedom to do a lot of things. And in fact, if you go back and you look at the chart above the chart above it on page 35, that one goes back essentially the last 200 years or 150 years, and you see that during the prime early industrial revolution, people working 3,000 hours per year on average. And now on average, we're somewhere between kind of 1,800, 1,900 if you take the total population. So it is already a natural curve for us. And essentially what's happening is that the technology is bringing us productivity to bring a higher quality of life for us. Now, if AI is going to be able to give us multiple X, in fact, probably much more than just single digit types of improvements in productivity. If you look at what it's doing for software, even today's developers, they're reporting somewhere between 50% to 5x increase in productivity. And very soon, in fact, if you look at the data that you just saw last week from OpenAI, their O1 model, they are able to do coding at 90+% percentile, right? And back just 3-4 months ago in May, when they came out with the original 4.0 model, it was at 15%. So you went from 15% to like 90% in a matter of a few months in terms of competitive coding. Right? This is not just regular coding simple, programs. This is essentially you can do high quality coding with an AI pretty much autonomously. In fact, last week when the O1 model came out, a guy who spent a year doing the program that visualized what was in his thesis, he took his thesis, took out the program and said, here's my thesis, make a program that visualizes this. And it took him 30 minutes using that tool to make a better version of what he took a year to write, right? And that's including getting a version came back that had an error. He took the error, sent it back to the model fixed the error. He then ran it again and it worked, right? So the whole process took less than half an hour. So if you think about the level of productivity gain we're talking about for white collar work, I mean, it is going to be amazing. And if you look at the US is about 60% of the jobs are white collar. You look at Europe, it's somewhere between 55 and 65% are white collar. And you look at China, I think it's about 35 or so percent are considered white collar, right? So for just the white collar work, we're going to have essentially almost, I would say, 50x increase in productivity if it's used properly, right? If you're an accountant, I mean, you could just say, here's all the returns I've seen, find any anomalies and then tell me and I'll review it, right? I don't have to review any of it because tax laws are pretty clear and so are the different, financial statements, right? So things that are like that, it is essentially for junior lawyers, people who are not going and doing litigation in court. You can do research, document creation. That stuff is completely going to be automated. I have friends in the law industry or law field who are very afraid for their junior people because they don't know what to do with them. They don't need that many anymore. Right. And I have friends in the accounting space. They were like, PwC or whatever. I went to their office and they're like, oh yeah, our young people are really worried right now because, AI is able to do so much of what they're doing. So this is the issue that we need to think about. And when that happens, the government has to step in. Because we cannot say, hey, we're going to have 30, 40, 50% of our population without a job, without a way of having an income. So we have to give everybody UBI. I know it sounds, very utopian and welfare state and all that. But if you go to Europe, I just spent the last week and a half in Europe. And Europe, most of Europe is a bit of a welfare state. And I got to tell you, they're pretty happy, right? Education covered, healthcare is covered. If you run into issues and you lose your job, then you have like a year of government will pay for things. If you have a kid, you have essentially 6 months to a year you can take vacation. I mean, it is so different than what it is in the U.S. in terms of how people are treated, both from a labor perspective and as well as from a just kind of basic services perspective. So. And they're able to do that with a GDP per capita that is about a half to 2/3 of the US, right? So it just imagine when the GDP per capita goes up by 10x or 50x, do we really even care about it anymore? Do we really, why should we even have this discussion of can we afford to have UBI? If we don't have UBI and you have people on the street who are trying to get food, who are trying to afford housing because they can't, they've lost their job, we're going to be in a in anarchy state, right? So this is something that a lot of people don't talk about, and I think it's super important.
Yeah. So does the GDP of the United States and China go like exponentially up, where the GDP of smaller countries that aren't pushing AI as much get kind of flattened out, and does the gap become gigantic?
So I think GDP is something that makes sense when productivity and production is the main measurement of value, right? And in a industrialized society, when labor and production is what we've been judged by in terms of how many cars are we making and how many computers and how many documents. But very soon, if AI essentially gives you almost infinite productivity per capita, then do you even need to measure it? And how does that then also impact the financial concept, right? So I know this is going to sound extremely utopian, but essentially if we played our cards right in the next 5 to 20 years, we are heading towards essentially a Star Trek type, the Federation type model, right? Where in the Federation, there is no money and nobody gets paid. People work because they love it, because they feel like they enjoy contributing to society, right? But nobody's forced to work. Now, they still have some credits for exchanging value between the non-Federation planets and whatever, but in general, nobody cares about what things cost. That, I think, is something that we will need to think about adopting. Now, in Star Trek, they relied on the Vulcans to fly from outer space and come and save the humans and give them technology that then gave them the capability to reach the society that was described in the story. But what we are doing now is creating an AI that is our Vulcan. We have the privilege of making our own Vulcans, whereas fictional stories, you had to depend on some third party and be lucky that they came to save you. Otherwise, the humans at the time would have gone down a very dark path, right? So I really think we should think about, and in a way it's quite appropriate, because Vulcans are very rational, not emotional, very intelligent, and able to essentially deliver next generation technology. Right. This is almost a perfect description of what these AI models are right now, and will become even more so when we start to give them the capability to have agent capability to do experiments, to actually do scientific breakthroughs versus just data analysis. Right now, they are just essentially data analysis, modeling the world, and then predicting what will happen, whether you're driving a car or whether you're writing a paper for you. It's predicting something. What we will soon have is they will be able to say, okay, I want you to take control of this lab and run whatever experiments you want. And by the way, why don't you also simulate this lab using the physics that we know about the world and create virtual experiments? And this is kind of what the Omniverse is that NVIDIA has been working on. And they're training their robots inside this Omniverse, and is able to run through 1 million years of training in a day for something that if you were trying to train them physically, it would take you almost forever, right? So it's amazing how close we are to getting breakthroughs in all of these areas. And I don't think most people realize the changes that are on our doorstep.
Okay, so the final question I want to ask is, what was the most impactful thing that you learned from your co-author, Louis Rosenberg, when writing the book?
As I said, when we started working, I think that the reason I also picked him is because we have differing opinions on things. And when you work with people who have a different opinion, but both people are mature enough to listen to each other, you actually learn new things. And I think by spending time working with him and talking with him and reading his materials, it gives me a more balanced perspective, right? Because I think in the past I was probably overly optimistic about how the world's going to turn out and how technology, kind of the more A16Z model of, technology is great, just keep doing it and good things will happen. But we all know that technology is always a dual-edged sword. And it's how you use it, it's how you apply it. In fact, the more good it can do, the more harm it can do. And we talked about a lot of the potential harm it can do to the world. Now, this is why at the end I urge people to take action. Right? This is what I learned most, is that we have to do something. We have to play a role in terms of how the next 5 to 10 years plays out. People who are in the AI industry, in the XR industry, in government, in corporate, researchers, everybody has a role that they can play to help lean it towards a positive end. Because if we just let the default go, the default will actually head more negative than positive. Right? This is we see that with social media, where I think initially it was something to connect the world, and in some ways it has connected the world, but it also has connected terrorists together. It has radicalized people. It has created bifurcation between parties and between religions and between groups of people with different beliefs, right? And it created enemies that don't need to exist. And it also created our addiction to our phones, that we're on it 10, 12, 15 hours a day. Right? So if we think from the perspective of all the good that can happen, and we get ahead of these potential harms, and we don't let the negative side of human nature take root, then we can get to this positive end, right? So I think optimism has to be there, but you also have to have the realist bent that optimist results does not come, or utopian results does not come by itself. It takes action. It takes putting your mind to do something and consistent action over time. So, and it takes convincing people. And this is actually why we're doing this talk, because I want people who are listening to you to hear this and to play a role. Right?
Well, we definitely will. Hopefully that gets out there. So yeah, I would recommend everybody check out your book. It is Our Next Reality: How the AI-Powered Metaverse Will Reshape the World.
Yeah, and it's just if you want more information, just go to ournextreality.com, and in there's also a link to a custom GPT that is already trained on the information from the book, so you can ask it all these questions. So Dylan, you could have just asked my GPT.
Yeah. What am I doing with the human?
It probably would have given you more eloquent answers than I would have.
These are all questions that I got while reading your book. And also, congratulations on getting Neil Stephenson to write the foreword to your book. If you don't know, that's the actual person who coined the word metaverse. Yeah, and just to throw in a couple of my own closing thoughts from the conversation, when it came to the US-China stuff, it did get me thinking a lot about how when the objective function has anything to do with competition with other humans, it's going to be hard to align superintelligence, right? The alignment problem is getting something where the whole world is focused on a problem that affects the whole world, and the solution is something that everybody's happy with. And the reason why it seems so likely in my head that we're going to kind of fumble the football, or why this is like such a high risk time in the story of humanity, because coming up with an intelligence and the fact that we can train them, build the objective functions, and they also can solve problems that no human can solve, means that if they're constructed in such a way that it sort of feels like a zero-sum game where you're like, oh, I need to win this battle, I need to stop another country, I need to stop another company, or I need to be the first to do this so I can get all of the wealth, instead of like the world needs this so that the world has more wealth, we're just in a pickle. And also, if they're agents and the world is multi-agent, like the way we have many humans with many different goals out there, which also seems very likely, it also seems hard to align them all because they're all pointed in different direction. They're all deployed for different reasons. They all have different data sets. And then anything that seems like truly overarching over the whole world, where we all came together to focus on, one outcome, just not only seems impossible, just the will, like hoping that people would come to the table and put aside all their differences and focus all their compute in one way, but just impossible logistically. So it seems like a human problem and a technical problem, even though the human problem seems the most daunting at this point. But then again, we also covered ways that it could help with our governance. Maybe it could be that mediator. I mean, there could be a superintelligence that's saying, okay, I also see this problem. I see all these agents out there. I see these different intentions that countries have towards each other that won't align the objective function. But in theory, if it can put those together in a way that would be superhuman, maybe even above the other agents that are deployed, and certainly above all the humans, then maybe that is kind of our solution. But it's such a weird thought to be like, we have to create the right AI to kind of sit and organize all the other AIs and all the humans. And that's going to be what we like leave the, future of humanity in. But looking at the more short term, there's certainly an amazing future that awaits us, especially with virtual reality and the kind of XR world coming into play, and the way that we'll be able to create anything that we want, and the possibilities are going to be endless. So just really excited to have read this book, to have learned those things. It really got me thinking, and I appreciate you.
Hey, thank you, Dylan, and appreciate all you're doing and all the insights that you're shedding for the world.